Is Hong Kong's startup ecosystem one of the world's best kept secrets? While you may know that Hong Kong is a global financial center, do you know how active and international its startup ecosystem is? Hong Kong's unique position as a financial hub makes developing fintechs obvious. But how about sectors like biotech, deep tech, and even green tech? Does being part of China's Greater Bay Area make it even better positioned to capitalize on the next wave of global tech trends? The Asia Tech Podcast wanted to know the answer to these questions and even more. So we invited Jayne, the head of startups at Invest Hong Kong, to give us a deep dive into whether or not Hong Kong is Asia's most dynamic startup ecosystem. Let's bring Jayne onto the show. I've been waiting for this one for a long time, Jayne. I really appreciate you coming to do this.
No,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much for having me.
Okay, before we get into the main thrust of this conversation, let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context, please.
Okay, maybe I could just split it up into three kind of sections. Actually, it's I've been working on this tech and this innovation space for quite a while. So I would say like the first third of my career really was that whole build up to the internet becoming a big thing. I mean, I started working in digital agencies, advertising agencies, other kind of marketing firms, and the whole internet thing in Hong Kong in those days was just starting out. So I was very lucky, actually, to have been involved and seen some of these kind of developments. It started off from, doing simple kind of, step-by-step interactive programs is what they used to call them. We worked with a number of firms, and from then on, we really then started seeing the massive ascension of the internet and the differences it was making. But then the whole thing imploded. And then the middle section of my career then was very much focused on, going in-house and doing marketing for, traditional industries. So, manufacturers, architectural firms, um, you know, that kind of side, which I didn't really touch too much prior to that. So that was another set of like fantastic learnings. And then finally, I think the last third of my career was, after the implosion of the internet and people then started using the internet as like it was just a regular kind of network that people were just using and being able to create lots of like fantastic kind of programs and really used it on a day-to-day kind of basis to enhance their companies. And then so that whole tech space was starting to take off again, and I went back into the space. I've been working at Invest Hong Kong now as head of startups for 10 years, and over that time seen some fantastic strides being made, and it's a lot of fun. I feel like I'm in a very privileged kind of position working in this role.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this just before we started recording. I feel super privileged as well, and particularly to have seen the same three cycles. I think we'll have some really interesting stuff to talk about. And you should know this. My first time in Hong Kong was 1990.
Wow,
July
wow.
1990. I remember like it was yesterday. Anyway, tell me, particularly from your perspective at Invest Hong Kong,
Mm.
how is Hong Kong Asia's most dynamic startup ecosystem?
Well, there's a lot of things happening here. I mean, I think if we just throw some data out to start, just so we can get sort of kind of context. So in Hong Kong, we've been tracking the development of the ecosystem using a survey for the past 10 years or so. Last year, we had just over 4,200 startups working in, the co-work spaces, the accelerators and incubators. So that's been quite a big number from previous years. In fact, if you compare it to 2019, for example, it's we saw like an increase of about 30 odd percent. So so it's a very, very healthy number even during the challenging times of COVID. So actual numbers is pretty good. But the one thing I suppose that really differentiates Hong Kong startup ecosystem is that about 27% of our founders come from outside of Hong Kong. So it's a very international and diverse ecosystem. The top countries of origin are it's mainland China, around 20% of that, and then we've got the UK, we've got the US, we've got the French companies as well as Australian companies making up sort of the top five. So I feel that kind of international perspective really helps to lend a different kind of lens on solving problems. If you've been raised in the UK, for example, and you see different kind of solutions being brought there, but then you take those kind of ideas and you adapt it to the kind of problems that you get here in Hong Kong, then it's, typically different from what someone else is going to be doing from, the US, or, if they've come here from, from Thailand. It's all, a big melting pot of different kind of ideas. So I think, that's what makes it really quite special as well. But again, if you look at the kind of stats and research, for example, Startup Genome, it's one of the world's de facto kind of like studies on startup ecosystems around the world. Um, on the report for 2023, Hong Kong was the second in the world in terms of the top 100 emerging ecosystems. So, for us to be in that kind of the position, I mean, obviously they do see those kind of business opportunities here. But I do think it's the fact that we have the fundamentals in place, which makes Hong Kong really dynamic. That's access to funding, access to talent, access to market.
Can I follow up a little bit? Because this is really interesting to me. A lot of the other startup ecosystems that I see don't have the same level of, I don't want to say cultural diversity, but definitely country diversity. And one of the reasons why I think is because it seems harder today. And again, this may just be my misconception, but it seems harder today to move like from your home country to another country. Like I remember when I was a kid, like I didn't feel like I was visa restricted from going or staying anywhere. Why does it seem so easy to look at the Hong Kong ecosystem, and why does it seem so easy for so many people from so many different countries to go there and to stay there and build stuff? Do you know what I mean? Because it seems like a real big benefit.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason actually is the fact that Hong Kong is one of the world's financial centers. I think recently in one of the studies, we are the third global international financial centers again in terms of ranking, and that's after New York and London, and then it's Hong Kong. And of course, with that being one of the world's financial centers, Hong Kong, has a lot of the financial institutions here, and so that tends to bring a lot of different kind of talent from around the world to come here. Initially working in the banks, the financial institutions, the investors, but later on, if they want to start moving into solving some of the problems that they're seeing in their industries, then they will, come out and create fintech. So I think so. It's partly that the fact that Hong Kong is one of the world's financial centers, but the other side also is that Hong Kong has been a trading hub for decades, Michael.
Yeah, yeah,
We all know that before Hong Kong was a conduit to the mainland, which was a factory of the world. And that was only, a few decades ago before some of these kind of manufacturing industries moved to other locations around Asia and India and other places. But the fact is that people have always leveraged Hong Kong as a means to actually get into mainland China for their manufacturing business, or basically to try and sell there, and vice versa. We had a lot of people from the mainland who want to go international, and they typically do it through Hong Kong. And the reason they do that is that, by virtue of Hong Kong's very special kind of role within the context of mainland China. I mean, we
yeah.
are part of mainland China, of course, but, we are very separate. That's why we call the one country, two systems. We have our own common law. We have our own currency. We have, the different ways of doing business. So it was for a lot of the international, whether we're talking talent or companies, it was actually a very familiar way to then access quite a different, you know, market with a lot of different cultures to adapt to. I think it's always been that in between place that made it easier for people to enter mainland China and vice versa. And now increasingly, it's also to enter into the rest of Asia as well, and not just the mainland.
Is there a vertical, I don't want to use the word bias, but is there like a vertical leaning there? In other words, do a lot of people focus on fintech, which would make perfect sense, right? Because there's so many of these financial services companies with which you can interact, or does it branch out into other type of deep tech and other types of tech startup companies? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, fintech is definitely our biggest sector, and unsurprising because it is, one of the biggest employers, that whole financial services industry here in Hong
Yeah.
Kong. And so when you've got people starting new companies, then, fintech is an area they inherently feel very familiar with. So that is our biggest kind of startup industry sector. But we've also got quite a substantial amount of companies working on the e-commerce and logistics tech. And again, that harks back to the fact that, we've been a trading hub for quite a few decades. And, again, lots of talent who are used to, working in the logistics industry, whether that was just like shipping things from Shenzhen to the rest of the world, like for a while, like Apple shipped the majority of their products from Shenzhen to Hong Kong and globally,
Right.
So a lot of people working in that kind of space as well. But then increasingly, we're starting to see quite a lot of the deep tech companies, showing up, especially, for example, in the biotech area. So Hong Kong is the second biggest fundraising hub for biotechs globally after New York, and that's not something people know about. And
I
and
didn't
that's
know that.
yeah, and it really is. And the reason that came about actually was the fact that the stock exchange changed its rules a few years ago to allow pre-revenue biotech companies to list, because with biotech it's a long game, and that
Yeah.
runway is it takes up a lot of financial resources before you actually come to the end kind of commercialized products. And for a lot of biotechs, it's a very hard way to go. So the fact that they're able to list and get, raise up a lot of revenue to actually maintain their runway for a little bit longer, I think it's a real boon for them. And so when the stock exchange changed these rules, Hong Kong very suddenly became a hub, a fundraising hub for biotech companies. So we've been seeing developments in that as well. But other areas that we've been seeing is on the green tech side, for example, a lot of climate tech solutions, as well as AI. There's no talk about tech without going into the AI side of things.
Yeah.
Quite diverse actually, but increasingly we're seeing strong kind of deep tech companies coming through as well.
Can you talk about, because you already mentioned this thing that the stock exchange did, right, to make biotech kind of more viable. You're right. We saw the same thing in the United States, if I'm correct, like in the 1980s and 1990s, where the VCs would go out and raise a ton of money for biotech companies that literally had no products yet. I'm not saying that's the case in Hong Kong, but it made it so much easier for these companies to go out and build businesses because it's very capex intensive, right? And the runway, like you said, to profitability or even to income is long. Are there other things that Invest Hong Kong itself either encourages the government or works with the government to do to make building that startup ecosystem so dynamic?
Well, we are the government department. Our
Fair enough.
department is there to basically support companies to set up and expand here in Hong Kong, and our team looks specifically in the startup side. But we are very much, dovetailing. What the policies that the policy making departments are coming out with. So, for example, there's a big push for digital assets. The regulators and our Financial Services and Treasury Bureau a few years ago decided that they wanted Hong Kong to become a digital assets hub, and correspondingly came out with various kind of regulations that really helped to provide clarity in an area that was still sort of like a bit hit and miss in different locations. I mean, it's risky. As soon as you talk crypto, for example, a lot of like countries are very sort of reticent, and it's something you've got to be very aware of, because it is still a very sort of like volatile and risk high kind of industry to develop. But we do see concrete use cases and positives in being a hub for those kind of industries, not least because Hong Kong, being one of the world's financial centers, we are really more focused on the B2B side when we're talking about now financial services. So,
Yeah.
a lot of the banks and institutions are working with other locations in Asia, with mainland China. So, when you've got kind of like good digital asset solutions that really help to, facilitate those cross-border, whether we're talking payments, currency flows, trade financing, leveraging digital assets to do that is in some ways, it really helps to provide efficiency, and it's very quick. So I think having come out with various kind of regulations through the regulators and things, we're very much out there. As soon as we get these kind of clarity, we go out and we go to different locations around the world, and we say, all right, we've got these kind of developments happening. If you are working in this kind of space, why don't you take a look at the opportunities in Hong Kong and see whether your solutions would be a potential good match for that. So these kind of the kind of ways that we are, Invest Hong Kong actually helps to execute on the policies that's driven up by our central government, as well as our local government as well, our various secretaries and the policies. So yeah, we're very much on in step on that.
Do you want to, because you mentioned it, right? And it's a good segue into artificial intelligence. Do you want to talk at all about what you're seeing in Hong Kong and just what you think the significance of it is?
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence, I think there's just so many people talking about it, isn't there? You've got the lawyers talking about it, obviously, in terms of, that kind of data privacy side, personal privacy, as well as like the responsible side of AI. You've got governments who obviously want to, uh, leverage the potential of that for the various kind of industries. So in Hong Kong, we, like any other major tech hubs, we've seen a lot of kind of developments within the whole AI industry. And actually, in most of the startups, AI, prior to it being this big buzzword, was something that was embedded, in many of
Yeah.
the companies.
They were
Uh,
using it, but they weren't talking about it, right? Because it wasn't like
yeah,
a buzzword. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, it was, and I think it's I think the way AI was used was different. I mean, generative AI really was, quite a different kind of technology. But prior to that, you had computer vision, you had like robotics
Machine
control
learning,
and
a whole bunch of
things.
stuff.
Yeah, all of that. So we had a lot of companies already deploying some of that, but now we are getting companies getting more and more specialized into AI and leveraging opportunities, especially once you had LLMs that were available, on a kind of open basis, and people could try different things. They could, use these kind of models and build on top of it and create APIs. So we are seeing a lot of kind of developments on that. But then the flip side is also, as a government, we've really got to be cognizant of the fact that AI is great, but the kind of potential for misinformation, for misuse, for a lot of those kind of more nefarious kind of potential uses of it, or just pure and simple mistakes, just from lack of data and training and things. It's got to be something that all governments have got to be cognizant of. I mean, for Hong Kong, the government basically created a new digital policy office in July this year, and this department is basically going to be playing a very crucial role, actually, in terms of promoting data-driven, people-centric, and outcome-based digital policies, especially in terms of like government. I mean, governments, we are quite a big stakeholder and kind of driver in some ways for the digital transformation, especially in large kind of organizations. We've got to adopt these kind of technologies, but then how do you deploy something like AI responsibly when you're talking about this, the privacy concerns of your citizens? So this digital policy office was set up to address things, including these kind of discussions on how do we deploy technology responsibly. Um, they basically also released the what we call the ethical artificial intelligence framework,
Yeah.
actually just a few weeks ago, and this framework basically helps to guide government departments, as well as some other kind of statutory bodies, we call them, to deploy AI. But we're also hoping that that's also going to roll into the private sector as well. So going to be lots of developments happening in that space.
So talk to me about this. We spoke a little bit earlier about how Hong Kong has kind of differentiated itself and used some of its like innate differences, things that have been around for a long time, right, to make it really dynamic. But I have this philosophy kind of across the board that no one succeeds alone. I'm wondering if you do any of these kind of reach out things where you reach out to the startup ecosystem in Fukuoka, or the one in Singapore, the one in Taiwan, even in Silicon Valley, to kind of not take what they're doing, but just understand better what's happening there and create synergies between all those separate startup ecosystems and kind of not merge them together, but benefit both ways.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, actually, Michael. I think, no place should be an island, frankly, if you want yourself to succeed in the digital innovation kind of space, especially now with technology and things like social media, being so pervasive, and the fact that you're so connected to what's happening around the world as well. So for us, we have always, been out there talking to different ecosystems and building those kind of bridges, whether we're talking about government to government, for example, or from private organizations to us. I mean, we've got 33 offices around the world, and that really helps. It means that we've got people on the ground, who reach.
33, that's a lot of offices. Wow, I didn't know that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we do. So we cover the majority of the major markets globally. And what's great about having those offices out there is that, of course, they're the ones on the ground who are building those kind of
Yeah.
initial kind of relationships and networks. But then, when we come in as in the sector teams, we've got 10 different sector teams in the head office here in Hong Kong. So when we go to those kind of locations, and for example, we want to find out what the investors in New York are looking into at the moment. What kind of challenges are they facing? What kind of collaboration are they potentially interested in with a place like Hong Kong? There's already some kind of relationship in place, and we try to deepen that by doing events over there. We collaborate with what we call the Hong Kong Inc. partners, like Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, like Cyberport. They have these programs where they're bringing startups to those locations, and we basically help to facilitate that. We organize events to showcase them, connect them. So it's hugely important, especially since like Hong Kong, we're a population of 7.4 million people,
Yep.
which as a city is pretty big, but it's like as a final market, it isn't. So we've always had to look international and to try and support the successful companies in Hong Kong to go and scale overseas. But also, we want to attract those really strong scale ups to come to Hong Kong and make a
Yeah.
difference in our economy as well.
So we just talked about this macro impact, right? Of having the ecosystems themselves connect to other ecosystems. I didn't realize you had so many offices around the world in 10 different verticals. I think people are going to be surprised when they listen to this. They're going to be like, oh my God, I definitely need to talk to Jayne now. Because if there are people on the ground in their city, then they can benefit from that in this kind of both way thing where they can benefit from what's going on in Hong Kong, but the people in Hong Kong can benefit from what's going on in, I'm just making it up, Boston. I don't know if you have an office in Boston, but I'm just making it up. But I want to get a little micro now, if you don't mind, but kind of on the same topic. In the old days, which let's say is 3 to 5 years ago, because time moves really quickly today, a lot of startups were talking about disruption. We're going to go into the insurance industry and we're just going to disrupt the whole thing, right? We're going to go into finance and we're going to disrupt like Goldman Sachs, which is probably not going to happen. And now it's more like what I'll call either enablement or value chain innovation. What kinds of things do you do if you have a fintech or an insurtech or even a deep tech startup to work together with incumbents? Because from the incumbent perspective, it's still a little bit risky, right? Is this company still going to be around? How deeply do we want to embed them? What kind of things do you do on that sense as well?
So, in terms of more pragmatic help, you bring up a good point, like fintechs, for example.
Yep.
We do Invest Hong Kong actually has a dedicated fintech team, and they have a program called the Fast Track Fintech program, and it's got two sides. One side is like a startup competition where they try to find the best fintechs and showcase them at the FinTech Week, which is happening in a couple of weeks' time, and hopefully get them exposure and potential. You know clients as well as investors. I mean, whatever they're looking for. But the other side of what they do is that even for companies that don't make it through to the competition, they can basically get onto the system, and we already have like a number of partners, corporate partners, as well as potential clients listed on there who have said, "Yep, I'm interested to connect with fintechs." And once they get onto there, they would have like it's like a little bit like a marketplace where the fintechs themselves can get like access to some of these different kind of players, whether they're looking for advice and free mentorship, for example, or they're looking for an investor. But it's also a place where the corporates themselves, they're looking for very specific solutions, and they can leverage that to access them. So that's one of the ways to provide that kind of that interface of to allow those kind of like-minded groups to connect together. The other side of actually trying to encourage more companies to adopt these fintech solutions, for example, I mean, it is risky, and it's
Yeah.
sometimes for like even for small companies, is a big thing of like how do I actually get this in, and is it going to take up a lot of my resources to actually you know get this software, even though it's going to help me, but I'm just not too sure. And for cases like that, the government has got different kind of programs, funding subsidy programs, to actually help the
Got it.
companies to actually adopt innovation and technology. So you've got to do it both ways. You've got to provide the kind of access to interfacing. You've also got to have like other kind of fundings or other ways to actually decrease the risk of adoption of tech. And so there's various kind of programs, whether we're talking fintech, whether we're talking about AI and other smart city solutions. There's different kind of programs that the government has launched to try and encourage more companies to adopt these innovations.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you need to, as you mentioned, you need to de-risk both sides, right? Because for the startup company with limited resources, committing to like a 6 month or 9 month project, which an incumbent bank or even an incumbent investment bank could be really risky. On the other hand, from the bank's perspective or the existing incumbent, first of all, allowing somebody in, sharing information, but then somehow committing to integrating technology with a company you're not sure is going to be around forever is also risky. So this idea of de-risking it, which is kind of what I was asking about, can be super important.
That's for sure. But you mentioned before about the attitude a few years ago of companies saying we're just going to be disrupting this industry and turn it completely upside down. I mean, you're right. That rhetoric really has changed. I think it's a lot of these digital banks or digital insurance companies are not really saying that we're going to be disrupting everything anymore. I mean, a lot of them are working with banks. I mean, banks to launch these digital banks to try and capture a different types of audience, and that whole kind of value adding collaboration between large incumbents and the nimble agile kind of startups. But we're starting to see that more and more.
So I feel like you're looking at my notes over my shoulder. I don't know how you're doing it, but
Great minds think
oh,
alike.
I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to check my studio to see if there's some kind of hidden camera somewhere. You mentioned it before that if you build in Hong Kong, right, you have to kind of take a worldview of it, particularly from a B2C perspective, right? From a B2B perspective, there are plenty of large, very large clients that do voluminous amounts of business, but the population's only around 7.4 million, right? But you're sitting right at the base of the GBA, the Greater Bay Area. And I'm wondering if you can talk to me about if that gives an edge both from a B2B perspective, but also from a potential B2C perspective, because the Greater Bay Area has 86 million people in it, which gives it much more leverage for growth. How does that work from the perspective of InvestHK?
Having the GBA on our doorstep is definitely, one of the differentiating points for Hong Kong in terms of development of a startup ecosystem. I mean, like you say, having the 86 million people there, if you are talking about B2C kind of solutions, obviously you've got the market there. The GBA, just to step back in case people don't know what it is, it comprises of 9 cities in southern China plus Hong Kong, Macau, and collectively that's known as the Greater Bay Area. And one of those cities is Shenzhen. And as most people know, a lot of the innovation and technology that happens in Shenzhen is probably the most advanced in mainland China. For example, Tencent has their head office there. TCL has their headquarters there, as well as Huawei and all these other kind of companies. And that in itself, sparks its own kind of cascading ecosystem of innovation and technology people. So tech hubs that are happening. And so when you are trying to sell your solution to a market that tends to be very receptive to innovation and tech, it helps to have like a quite a sophisticated tech savvy kind of audience. So the GPA is really great for that. But so what we tend to see, for companies who are interested in Hong Kong coming from overseas, they may be an American company that is looking to develop its climate tech, green tech kind of company here in Hong Kong, but it's usually like a test kind of market. So what they do is basically refine their solution and adapt it to make it suitable for a more kind of like, Asian kind of audience, or even it's just a case of just how they market it is different, isn't it? It's not a
Yeah.
case of just whatever's going to work overseas is going to automatically work in a place like Hong Kong because it's international. It's not. It really is like this melting pot, this of like the East meets West. So we do find companies adapting and changing some of the technologies or how it's some of the processes, how it's marketed, with the idea, of course, to enter the GBA at some point as well, because those are, where you've got the big numbers, you've got the big tech companies with the kind of budgets, that can potentially procure these innovations. So it's the GBA is a big kind of opportunity for us. And also I mentioned before, a lot of the companies in the GBA, especially now with the mainland having a slightly tougher time of it economically, they are sort of like looking to go international, and instead of just looking purely at the domestic market. So we're seeing a huge amount of companies in the mainland who, again, trying to adapt to an international market, tends to set up something here in Hong Kong, change their solutions, change the rhetoric, hire the right people, says the right things before they actually take it elsewhere. So, it's a great facilitator.
Yeah, I mean, it's a $2 trillion GDP. So even though the monetary numbers are not small, I want to ask you one more thing before I let you go, if that's okay. You mentioned earlier the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and I've traded on the HKSE. And I'm just wondering, and I don't want to disparage any of the other kind of regional stock exchanges, but Hong Kong was always pretty liquid. Do you think it gives the startups that are in Hong Kong a kind of another chance, another place, excuse me, that other startups don't have to exit if possible? Because if they exit onto the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the world is going to be looking at what's happening there, and there'd be enough liquidity to make it worthwhile to list. So do you work together with them as well to make that a possibility too?
We are very much, working with the stock exchange to support startups who are looking to exit. I mean, the stock exchange also is looking for innovative kind of companies,
Yeah, new
um,
companies.
yeah, to to basically increase the kind of diversity of types of companies within the exchange as well. I mean, they don't want just a regular kind of traditional property companies, or your kind of large conglomerates. They definitely want to bring some of that innovation in house, and so yes, we do. We you know have this collaboration with different partners, including the stock exchange, to try and support the kind of startup. So Invest Hong Kong, what we do, depending on the stage of a startup, we offer different types of customized, targeted kind of services. If you're really early stage, we'll be telling you about the accelerator programs that are around, or if they're looking for funding and they're still at seed stage, we may be recommending angel investors to them. Or if they're not, if they've set something up in Hong Kong already, we give them opportunity to market themselves. We maybe organize events where they can get exposure, get connected to other people. But once they're in the scaling up stage, we are very much like encourage them to look at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, because, as you say, it is a very liquid,
Yeah.
stock exchange, where we're increasingly seeing a lot of tech companies being listed on there as well. So I think it's definitely one of those, kind of exit routes and funding routes that is available that may not be as available in other locations.
Yeah, particularly in this region. Okay. I really want to thank you for doing this. Jayne Chan, head of startups at Invest Hong Kong. I've honestly learned a ton from beginning to end, and I think people that listen to this are going to learn a ton as well. Thank you so much for your time and all the time that your team has spent organizing this. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. And Michael, if I may, can I just mention very quickly the Start Meet Hong Kong Festival, which will be
Please.
running from the 21st to the 25th of October, which is next week. Lots of different events going on, and hopefully we'll see some of your audiences come along to that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.